with CBS News correspondent Roger Mudd.
Last spring, American soldiers fought a two-day battle that newspapers or onto the television news broadcasts. Very few people even knew about it. The battle was fought neither in Vietnam, nor in Cambodia, nor anywhere else in Southeast Asia. All the action took place in North Carolina. This was a military exercise, but it was also an exercise in salesmanship, the selling of the Pentagon.
Gentlemen, today we have shown you the individual Marine, the man who implements foreign policy.
He comes from all walks of life and from all over the USA. He's not much different from the young men we see on the street corners of America today, except he's been trained as a Marine. He believes in what he is doing, and he's dedicated to his country and to the job at hand, whatever it may be. In short, we could say he has a lot of plain old, red-blooded American guts. Now this concludes our demonstration at this range. The escorts will now show you to your buses. Thank you very much.
Nothing is more essential to a democracy than the free flow of information. Misinformation, distortion, propaganda all interrupt that flow. They make it impossible for people to know what their government is doing, which in a democracy is crucial. The largest agency in our government is the Department of Defense, and it maintains a public relations division to inform people of its activities. In December, Congress cut the appropriations for this division, but according to the Pentagon, it will still spend $30 million this year on public affairs, an amount more than 10 times what it spent to tell people about itself just 12 years ago. Even this figure may be only the tip of the public relations iceberg. A special, still unpublished report for the prestigious 20th Century Fund estimates the real total at $190 million. The combined news budgets of the three commercial television networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, are $146 million. Whatever the true cost at the Pentagon, there have been recent charges in the press and in Congress that the department is using these public relations funds not merely to inform, but to convince and persuade the public on vital issues of war and peace. 10 months ago, CBS News set out to investigate these charges and to examine the range and variety of the Pentagon's public affairs activities. We selected 3 areas for concentration: direct contacts with the public, Defense Department films, and the Pentagon's use of the media, the press and television. We sought no secret files, no politicians pleading special causes, no access to classified documents. We looked only at what is being done for the public in public. We began in an obvious location, Armed Forces Day on a military base. Fort Jackson, South Carolina is proud of its soldiers, and once a year, the public is invited to come out and take a look at them. At dozens of other bases, dozens of other audiences see the same show. The major event is a firepower display, but in the interests of information, they not only shoot, they also instruct.
The killing zone is 50 meters deep, 50 meters wide, and 2 meters high. However, its fragments are also effective against light-skinned vehicles.
The weapons officer on this range claimed the information display cost $2 million. Later, Army public relations officials put the expense at $22,000. The last part is known as the Mad Minute. It would be hard to argue with that description. When the demonstration itself is over, another activity begins. The ammunition is gone, but the weapons are not. Some of these are turned over to children so they can get the heft and feel of the genuine article.
All right, Jack, this is a cool tank here, man. Aim it over at the other tank. Come on. Get off. Hey, fella.
In the Chinese view, only one country has been liberated from colonialism, and that is North Vietnam. And the others will not be considered liberated in the Chinese viewpoint until each and every one has a communist government.
The Pentagon has a team of colonels touring the country to lecture on foreign policy. We found them in Peoria, Illinois, where they were invited to speak to a mixed audience of civilians and military reservists. The invitation was arranged by Peoria's Caterpillar Tractor Company, which did $39 million of business last year with the Defense Department. The Army has a regulation stating personnel should not speak on the foreign policy implications of U.S. involvement in Vietnam.
Well, now we're coming to the heart of the problem, Vietnam. Now, the Chinese have clearly and repeatedly stated that Thailand is next on their list after Vietnam. If South Vietnam becomes communist, it will be difficult for Laos to exist. The same goes for Cambodia and the other countries of Southeast Asia. Well, I think if the communists were to win in South Vietnam, the record in the North, what happened in Tet Up 68, makes it clear there would be a bloodbath in store for a lot of the population of the South. Now, the United States is still going to remain an Asian power.
Over the years, the colonels have traveled at taxpayers' expense to 163 cities and spoken to 180,000 people. In a question and answer period, they promote American presence in Southeast Asia.
The bloodbath, the indications at Hue during the Tet Offensive as to what might be in store for a people who would otherwise have some semblance of freedom or individuality if we did stay and protect their interests as well, admittedly, as our own.
I personally believe, by and large, the college students are very sincere in their belief. I think a lot of them haven't attempted to study to some degree the history of other things like this.
Some say that there are no interests at stake today. Some say we had none in the beginning. I feel when we put 500,000 men in there, at least we placed national interests at stake when we did that.
Let Danny do it by himself.
No, it's my turn.
Bob, let's see if you can do it.
How many mistakes you gonna make?
At a St. Paul, Minnesota shopping mall, an Army display emphasizes power, a recurrent theme in Defense Department public relations programs. The Army Exhibit Unit has been to 239 cities in 46 states and has been seen by over 20 million people. The cost to taxpayers, $906,000 a year.
There are 4 M's: mission, motivation, modernization, and management. Summarize Army Chief of Staff General William C. Westmoreland's program for the future of the Army.
The Army says it won't send these exhibits out unless requested by local civilians. The manager of this shopping mall told us how the Army's exhibit happened to be there.
We were approached by Sergeant Kerr, who is the local recruiting sergeant in this area, a matter of about 3 weeks ago, and he simply asked us, would we care to have the exhibit here on our mall? We said yes. So it's here.
Approaching next will be Major Mike Kirby and his next maneuver, the exciting wing walk and roll.
The Air Force Thunderbirds flew 108 exhibitions last year in front of 6 million people. We were told that the Thunderbirds are supposed to attract volunteers. But what we found was a very elaborate commercial for air power.
The Air Force has proved again and again its superiority against the enemy in the air war over North Vietnam.
in an environment where the majority of our fighter pilots were flying tactical bombing missions and not primarily hunting for enemy aircraft, the enemy still lost 3 aircraft for every one of ours in air-to-air combat.
We fought them up on the DMZ. We fought them across the Lao border. We fought them down south across the Cambodian border. But they're trying to keep the war going on. Why? Because they think that we're going to give up and pull out before the job is done. That's what they've been told. That's what they read in our newspapers and our magazines. We must
Tonight, like any other evening, there are between 6 and 10 Pentagon speakers appearing in public. With military transportation at their disposal, they traverse the country, shaping the views of their audiences. For years, General Lewis Walt has been the Marine speaker most in demand.
This is what's kept the war going on. If we could have the entire American nation back of us, all of our Americans back of our armed forces in South Vietnam, this war would have been over a year and a half ago.
Please pay particular attention to the hands, the elbows, the knees, and the toe of the boot, which are used to deliver killing blows to the vulnerable portions of the body.
When it comes to sheer muscle, the legendary Green Berets are the Army's glamour exhibit. In 21 states last year, the Berets showed how people kill people sometimes. On one occasion, they showed about 1,000 kids in New Jersey.
You're a good guy. The belt throw.
There's a Sean Tabler, Windsor, New Jersey.
Jim, try it again. Come on. No. Jim.
Each year, the Pentagon runs special guided tours for over 3,000 influential civilians. The Joint Civilian Orientation Conference is the aristocrat of these tours, indeed of all Defense Department contacts with the public. For 8 days, 64 prominent citizens visit key military installations all over the country.
Oh, boy. Nothing like the red carpet treatment, isn't it, Pat?
To give the community leaders more sense of participation, the Defense Department outfits them in different colors that represent each of the armed services. Included in this exclusive party are industrialists, bankers, college administrators, newspaper publishers, and broadcasting executives. High-ranking generals accompanied the civilians. These 2-, 3-, and 4-star chaperones were available for briefing, picture-taking, and just mingling. CBS News followed the distinguished visitors on a weekend war game in North Carolina. The purpose of these tours, according to the Pentagon, is to teach military realities. The guests are referred to as major taxpayers. As their education proceeded, we recorded some of the military realities and part of their impact on the civilians. The Army gave a demonstration of a massive troop airlift, and air and land assault on enemy territory was simulated for the visitors. The idea here was to show that thousands of troops can be transported thousands of miles in just a few hours. What's more, when they get where they're going, they're ready to fight.
Notice the jitterbugging action as the Cayuses make a thorough search of suspected enemy location. Such tactics were battle-tested in Vietnam.
To achieve success in combat, an infantry battalion depends upon the fighting strength of its rifle companies. The company is composed of 3 rifle platoons and a weapons platoon.
The 64 civilians themselves paid part of their own costs, and the official total price of this tour is only $12,000. $12,000, however, does not include the amount spent on elaborate briefings, the war game itself, nor the expenses of several thousand servicemen who perform for the civilians along the way.
711 tons of ammunition and 308 tons of fuel.
I, for one, am very grateful for this privilege of seeing how the defense of the country is being organized.
I've found it enjoyable to talk to the enlisted ranks who are handling the weapons as we got in the tanks, and I think there's been a subtle, necessary, and important emphasis on talking to the manpower.
Of course, it can carry rockets. You can substitute a rocket pod for the bomb. It has tremendous flexibility.
A lot of kill power, though.
Oh, yes.
Civilians were shown some of the more advanced equipment and training methods. Among the ordnance the Marines displayed were their planes, their weapons, their tanks, and of course their commandant, General Leonard Chapman.
Excuse me, General Chapman. Mr. Hoover. How are you, sir? Nice to see you.
Like a real here.
Bob, you're getting too enthusiastic.
There we go. You're going to.
Boy, we're really making time now.
I think the message I would take back is that we have a first-class military organization led by first-class leaders, and the people who carry the load on the enlisted men are some of the finest people that I've been privileged to see. And I'm in the investment banking business, and I travel all over the United States. And I know that for a fact.
I think the message is that you can be proud of your boys in service.
The Defense Department did not permit CBS News to film what many regarded as the highlight of the tour, but the civilians were not shy in talking about it.
With Fort Hood, we all were seated in the gunner's seat of the M60 tanks, and we fired the rifles, and were told what excellent shots we were, and then we were taken over to the recoilless rifles and fired rounds at armored personnel carriers, and again told how good shots we were. Then we fired grenade launchers, drove tanks and so on.
We fired tank cannon and recoilless rifles and machine guns.
My gun jammed while I was shooting it, and I thought, oh my God, what a great situation to be in, were someone moving on me.
But it was fun to actually get your finger on the trigger of some of the things like the recoilless weapons that most of us have heard about but hadn't actually seen.
There is no substitute for hands-on experience.
The Defense Department says these demonstrations are merely training exercises for war. War, however, is not fought in front of a grandstand.
Let me remind you that the speed and flexibility which you have seen today and the maneuverability and coordination of the supporting forces is not a demonstration. It is the stock-in trade of the United States Marine Corps.
One of the things I can personally see from this tour is that a lot of the statements that, for example, Mr. Fulbright and Mr. Proxmire make are absolutely baseless.
I just wish that all the American people could see what we've seen. I think we'd find much less of this carping at the military, and we'd find a lot more understanding.
I think one part of this tour is that you won't find a George Romney statement about being brainwashed.
As we proceeded through numerous phases where we were personally involved, my opinion has changed 180 degrees.
ironic that while our finest young men are fighting halfway across the world, other young men and women, safe at home, openly advocate abandonment of Vietnam to communism. Perhaps they really don't know what this war is all about.
With scenes of war protesters tinted red for emphasis, the Defense Department introduces a film on Vietnam, narrated by television star Jack Webb. Over 300 films a year are made by the Pentagon. Most of them are meant originally for troop information, but a large number is later released for public showing. It's widely known that the Defense Department often helps sympathetic Hollywood producers who need troop support for their war movies. What has received far less attention is that the Pentagon itself spends over $12 million a year on its own pictures. The annual cost of a single Army series, The Big Picture, is $900,000, and the overall Army film budget is more than $6.5 million a year. During the 1960s, at least 52 million Americans saw Pentagon motion pictures. 45,000 public gatherings viewed them, and at least 356 commercial and educational television stations have presented them as part of their public service broadcast time. Facts and information, not opinions and attitudes, are supposed to be the ingredients of Defense Department films. An official Pentagon directive states, propaganda has no place in Defense Department public information programs. In preparing this broadcast, we looked only at products of the last decade, all made after the thaw in Cold War politics. Well-known journalists and movie stars often serve as narrators for the films, as these excerpts show.
Hi, I'm Bob Stack. As you may know, one of my hobbies is collecting guns. I've hunted on and off all my life, from California to Mexico to safaris in Africa. Now, speaking of guns and faraway places, I've just come back from a trip to Vietnam, where guns are used for an entirely different purpose.
The Defense Department.
The Pentagon helped John Wayne make the Green Berets. John Wayne helped the Pentagon make this film in Vietnam. Over 1,000 prints are in circulation.
In Vietnam, revolution is a double-edged word. The enemy uses it. It's what they call the aggressive war they're using against the people over here.
That's the story. And there's nothing mysterious about the kind of revolution the enemy has in mind. It's the same thing we've seen in many parts of the world ever since the communist revolution 50 years ago. Murder, assassination, terror. And over here, they've killed over 20,000 civilian leaders. And it's these same brave people who have had the will and the guts to conduct their own revolution, a real revolution for the betterment of their people.
Not only movie stars have aided Pentagon propaganda, for patriotic reasons, newsmen such as Edward R. Murrow, Lowell Thomas, and John Daly often volunteered their talents during World War II and the Cold War. The Pentagon has used many journalists to carry its message, including some years ago, two of the best-known broadcasters.
I'm Chet Huntley. To most of us, this is the United States Navy. The aircraft carrier, the cruiser, and destroyer. The modern deep-water Navy, extending American strength across the oceans of the world. This is the American Navy in Vietnam, moving quickly where and when needed, displaying the flexibility of modern sea power, controlling the seas, extending its influence on land, and holding superiority in the air, a three-way force for peace, geared to meet aggression at any spot on the globe.
The Eagle's Talon, made in 1962, narrated by Walter Cronkite, deals with America's response to communism.
Starting in World War II, the aggressive communist tide is spread in Europe and Asia to engulf its neighbors. Communist China even now has plans to dominate Asia by mass murder, destroying ancient civilizations. Right next door is the nation we freed in 1898, Cuba. A communist tyranny holds sway, and whiskers do not hide the naked face of dictatorship. Our army is face to face with communism around the world. To meet immediate threats on any front, we must build up our land forces at home and overseas. This soldier, guarding one of Asia's gateways against Soviet aggression, symbolizes the determination of free men everywhere to resist communist expansion by force of arms.
On a policy level, the Pentagon says it has discarded the rhetoric of confrontation. But city by city, public showing by public showing, the language and symbols of the early 60s are still being widely distributed in the 70s. Here in Elmendorf, Texas this month, a Baptist congregation attends a Pentagon film on communism made in 1962. Even though the expressed policy of the United States is negotiation and not confrontation, even though Walter Cronkite and Chet Huntley may now disagree with the intent of the films they narrated, even though the roles of journalist and government spokesman are incompatible, the films grind on and on. A Pentagon film often contains a map that seems to be bleeding. The blood turns out to be the spread of international communism. Interpretations of communism and assessments of communist intent are significant themes in Defense Department films. In Red Chinese Battle Plan, an anonymous Pentagon narrator describes a foreign policy bent on world conquest.
It is a blueprint for world revolution. Red China's Battle Plan. Divide and encircle. Conquer and enslave.
In an excerpt from a film called Road to the Wall, the Pentagon has James Cagney tell of a communist plan that encompasses even more than the world.
The wall is a solid fact. It stands and will stand wherever the road of world communism leads. Someday, according to its builders, it will surround not merely the world, but the moon, the stars, outer space, the universe.
In what is perhaps the Pentagon's most ambitious film, Red Nightmare, Jack Webb presents a Russian scheme to crush American freedom.
Americans, they have too many freedoms. That is another thing you must remember, comrade. For one day it will be your mission to destroy those bourgeois capitalist freedoms.
Frightening, isn't it?
The hero of Webb's film, a lathe worker named Jerry Donovan, dreams that his town is invaded by communists. With remarkable ease, they quickly subvert everyone except Donovan himself, who listens with shock to a commissar's speech.
When the moral fiber of the United States weakens and the economy collapses under the pressure of competitive coexistence, it will be your responsibility, comrades, to purge the minds of the reactionary Americans so that they will welcome the enlightened Soviet system and conform without resistance to the dictatorship of the proletariat. Hey.
When Donovan returns home, he is horrified to find his own daughter about to leave for a commune.
Daddy? It's true, Daddy. I did volunteer for farm work.
Linda, why?
The party convinced me that I should free myself of the lingering bourgeois influence of family life. I am ready. Do not interfere. It is for my own good.
And Comrade Donovan, do not think that your deviationist remarks shall be overlooked. They will be reported to the proper authorities.
Comrade Donovan, you're accused of the following crimes against the state: subversion, deviationism, and treason.
900 prints of Red Nightmare are currently in circulation. It was first released in 1962, reissued in 1965. The film was made for the Armed Forces Directorate on Information.
As an ugly remnant of a diseased bourgeois class, he must be eradicated before the contagion can spread.
Believe me, you communists can't keep fooling the entire world. You can't even keep fooling your own people. Because the news about communism is getting around. But it's only another word for slavery.
Don't worry, Jerry. That bullet will never reach you. Because it's time to bring you back from your red nightmare.
The Defense Department believes that one of the best ways to save Americans from a red nightmare that comes true is with films like these. Although the Pentagon labels them informational, these films contain a high proportion of propaganda, as well as an obsession with monolithic communism. Tax money financed all of them, and they have been distributed during the Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon administrations. It has been more than a decade since the national policy of peaceful coexistence replaced the harsher rhetoric of early Cold War years. But to the filmmakers at the Pentagon, with at least $12 million a year to spend, 1946 seems to have lasted a whole generation. The Pentagon in Washington is the command post of a military establishment with a multitude of ways to get its message across to the public. Many millions of Americans are reached by Defense Department displays, tours, and motion pictures. But the widest, most penetrating of all contacts the Pentagon has with the public is through the media, newspapers, magazines, radio, and television. Once each day, the press and the Pentagon have a formal confrontation.
Dr. Foster has discussed the 3 different kinds of SS-11s.
These are MRV, not MIRV.
That's correct. These are MRV, not MIRV. We were not able to discuss.
Every morning at 11 o'clock, in pursuit of Defense Department news, Pentagon reporters get a crack at a careful and respected adversary, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Jerry Friedheim. He does not, of course, tell all he knows. He wouldn't have his job long if he did.
I can't discuss that.
What about the size of the warheads?
I just don't have anything I can give you on that. We'll pursue that question.
When have you last had 3 carriers on station on that?
We'll have to check back and find that date for you.
Has the Guam chopped to the 6th Fleet?
Negative. It has not.
Would she normally just be going to replace one of them? Is that what that?
That has been normal operations in the past. We've observed some 19 Soviet combatant vessels there in recent days. The 6th Fleet strength, roughly comparable, slightly larger.
Slightly larger?
Correct.
It's extremely difficult for a Pentagon reporter, even a regular, to establish sources outside of the public affairs arm.
Former Public Information Officer Jack Tolbert was an Air Force major who worked with the press at many military bases for 12 years. He believes the Defense Department confronts reporters with numerous obstacles.
The Department of Defense has so many avenues of getting its story across, around and through and over and under the media, that I'm not, in fact, sure that even if every reporter that covered the Pentagon was a hard-nosed reporter, that we still wouldn't get the story through.
The vastness of the defense establishment confronts a reporter with an almost impossibly complex task. Pentagon stories develop in many other ways besides formal briefings, but the sheer size of the building itself remains bewildering. Often it is impossible to get to a news story, even when the story does not involve national security, until the Pentagon chooses to announce it. Going into and out of the 30,000 Pentagon offices each day are 200,000 phone calls and 129,000 pieces of mail. But very little of this communicating is done with the press. Although the Department of Defense is the biggest business in America, over 95% of the news bureaus in Washington do not even assign a reporter regularly to the Pentagon. More newsmen cover the pennant race than the arms race. We asked the man in charge of all Pentagon public relations, Assistant Secretary of Defense Daniel Henkin, if he thought the press did a good job covering the Defense Department.
I believe that it does. From time to time, of course,
gives me some headaches, and I give the press some headaches. We understand that. We act as professional. There's a professional relationship, not only with the Pentagon press and the other members of the Washington News Corps, but with newsmen who cover military activities around the world.
What about your public displays of military equipment and at state fairs and shopping centers? What purpose does that serve?
Well, I think it serves the purpose of informing the public about their armed forces. I believe that the American public has a right to request information about the armed forces, to have speakers come before them, to ask questions, and to understand the need for our armed forces, why we ask for the funds that we do ask for, how we spend these funds, what are we doing about such problems as drugs, and we do have a drug problem in the armed forces. What are we doing about the racial problem in the armed forces, and we do have a racial problem. I think the public has a valid right to ask us these questions.
Well, is that sort of information about the drug problem you have and the racial problem you have and the budget problems you have, is that the sort of information that gets passed out at state fairs by sergeants who are standing next to rockets?
No, I wouldn't limit that to sergeants standing next to any kind of exhibit. Now, there are those who contend that this is propaganda. I do not agree with this.
What the press wants to reveal, the Defense Department often wants to conceal. We asked the Washington Post's military specialist, George Wilson, who should be prouder of Pentagon press coverage, the press or the Pentagon?
The Pentagon, by virtue of its overwhelming troops in this area, has done better in propagandizing as a whole than the press has done on exposing. I don't fault the digging reporters, and there are several. What I fault is the lack of demand from the editors, both of TV and of newspapers generally.
How hard is it, Mr. Wilson, for a single reporter at the Pentagon to discover the truth when the Pentagon doesn't want the truth to be known?
It's difficult. They can always pull out the secrecy stamp and say it's against the national interest to give you the full explanation for what we did, but you'll just have to trust Big Daddy.
Can't a case be made, Mr. Wilson, from the standpoint of national security to prohibit you from printing in your paper information that the enemy wants to know?
It certainly can. A case can be made, but my counter to that is that if the weapon is going to be described in public as it was in 1969 and 1970, along with the sales job to get the anti-ballistic missile defense approved, it should be described accurately. The point here is that because the technology is reachable, that there will always be pressure to build it. Weapons are inexorable and they're imperious, and only public challenges and public resistance can keep technology from running us right onto the road of Armageddon. And I think that points up why more coverage of the Pentagon is desirable. Editors should have a larger appetite for these weapons because they're not just nuts and bolts. They often dictate the largest policy decisions in the world today.
This is Army Specialist Gene Camfield reporting from Pleiku, Republic of Vietnam.
The armed forces do not have to wait for radio, television, and newspapers to come to them. They have their own ways of reaching the media. At the Army's hometown news center in Kansas City, a blizzard of press releases is turned out in all seasons. Each year, 12,000 radio and television tapes are mailed to 2,700 radio stations and 546 television stations. Over 2 million printed releases are sent to 6,500 daily and weekly newspapers. In these releases, medals, promotions, and reassignments are emphasized. While transmitting legitimate information about servicemen, the News Center also functions as a publicity agency for American forces abroad. The only news from the center is good news. The center is commanded by Colonel Richard Stewart, who feels the operation is helpful to the Army.
This is another way of seeing your Army in action. And it's even more meaningful because the people can relate to this particular soldier. This is not just an exercise or a combat operation, something of that nature, but this here is Sergeant Willie Jones.
There are hundreds of thousands of weeklies and small dailies in this country that live on what we call the hometown release, where the Army, Navy, and the Air Force maintain hometown news release centers and are just spewing this stuff into these newspapers, who accept it willingly, who print it.
They have said time and time again when I've talked to them, they said, keep it coming. In effect, words like that, keep it coming.
With the press, and this is the whole press, the community press, which is extremely important to this country, is giving a free ride to a military story.
I'm one of those who believes that the most vicious instrument in America today is a network television.
Using sympathetic congressmen, the Pentagon tries to counter what it regards as the anti-military tilt of network reporting. War heroes are made available for the taped home district TV reports from pro-Pentagon politicians. Here, Representative F. Edward Hebert of Louisiana asks Major James Rowe, a Green Beret and former POW, what keeps the Viet Cong fighting.
Sir, the support that the VC received from the United States is the only thing that keeps them fighting.
Later, Congressman Hebert, who is the new chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, asks Major Rowe for his reaction to a peace rally.
I walked up and I heard one of the speakers yelling, down with imperialism, down with capitalism, down with the oppressive leadership in Washington, power to the people. I heard the same thing from the Viet Cong, sir, except there it was in Vietnamese and here it was in English. And I looked around the crowd, I walked through the crowd, and I saw VC flags flying from the flagpoles at Washington Monument. I saw American flags with VC flags flying over the top of them. I saw American flags with the stars removed and a peace symbol superimposed. I saw the red flag with a black peace symbol on it. And then I heard one of my senators say, we're here because we cherish our flag. And the only thing I could think of then, sir, was what flag does he cherish?
Let me congratulate you, Pleasa. It's an honor to have had you on this program with me. And I only wish to God we could have more people wearing the uniform privileged to speak as you've spoken, because the silent majority will and must be heard.
The war is covered extensively not only by the civilian press, but also by the Defense Department's own camera crews in Vietnam. Their product is distributed to American TV stations and networks. This is a soccer match played by North Vietnamese prisoners of war and filmed by the Defense Department. It is intended to supplement regular network news coverage. But the Defense Department can hardly be said to be a disinterested observer in Vietnam. Recently, there have been charges that some of the Pentagon's footage was staged. In fact, the cameraman who filmed this soccer game told CBS News the prisoners had never been permitted to play soccer before, but were trotted out for this match when his crew arrived. The cameraman, former Air Force Sergeant Thomas DeMiter, spoke about his filming experience shortly before leaving the service after 16 years.
In many stories that were filmed in Vietnam with my team, we staged a number of stories of the Vietnamese. We were propagandizing the war, and for example, there was a story titled U.S. and South Vietnamese Forces Patrol Enemy Infiltration Routes. We went out with the Vietnamese in the riverine patrol, went down the river until we found an area that was suitable for our landing. Because I knew it wasn't an actual combat situation, I had no fear. I was off the boat on the land before the Vietnamese infantry came on, so that we could get a shot as the boats came on to the shore. They proceeded inland about 3/4 of a mile or half a mile while we were getting shots of theirs running through the rice paddies. They didn't fire any shots. There were no traces of the Viet Cong. We were told when we thought we had a sufficient amount of footage exposed to tell the Vietnamese, and they would turn around. When someone turns around and asks you, well, do you have enough film? And you say yes, and it's definitely staging.
Later, while filming the same story, Sergeant DeMiter shot real combat footage involving American troops.
In the final release, we see none of the actual combat footage of the Americans. We see all of the stage footage of the Vietnamese, and it would lead someone to believe that the Vietnamese were doing the majority of the work. The staged action got in. The actual action did not get in.
We are trying our best to provide information. There undoubtedly have been times when certain actions have been staged. I think this is true of all TV news coverage. After all, this interview here is being staged.
How so?
Well, the props were set up, arrangements were made. You and I just did not just walk into this room cold. Arrangements were made for it.
Well, we wanted to film in your office, but your people said, let's go in the studio.
No.
So we didn't stage it.
We are conducting limited duration protective reaction airstrikes.
Defense Department information machinery is well established in Vietnam, where a special language has developed that takes some time to learn. Protective reaction means the United States resumed the bombing of North Vietnam. Selective ordnance means napalm. Defoliation means nothing will grow there anymore. A civilian irregular defense group volunteer is a mercenary. Population resettlement means getting villagers out of their villages. And Military Assistance Command daily press briefing means this scene right here, which is popularly known among newsmen in Saigon as the 5 o'clock follies. The most popular phrase at these sessions, however, needs no explanation.
No comment. Nothing further to say.
Maybe you can answer my question.
I have nothing further to add to the statement that's been read. I repeat, I have no comment.
Why can't you comment?
Often, the press is an unwitting partner in its own deception. Former Information Officer Talbert once took great pride in utilizing the media. He's not so proud of the record anymore.
A network was coming over to cover and do a documentary on the air war over North Vietnam. They were going to film it out of Da Nang, where I was the information officer. So in preparing for them, we tried to pick out the most articulate, the best-looking pilots that we could to be able to describe through their eyes what the air war was all about. We briefed the pilots so that they would understand that we were trying to present our views in a one-voice concept. We didn't want divergent views coming from a variety of the different pilots that might raise questions concerning whether they understood or whether they were satisfied with the way the air war in the North was being fought.
And the cast of characters that you made available to those network men was such that they never heard any dissension or criticism about the bombing mission.
No, never. Being an insider, knowing fully what was going on, if I was absolutely candid with them and opened all of our closets to them, yes, they would have come out with a lot more balanced report. I could have helped them do that.
What was the result of that network team's journalistic efforts?
Frankly, it was just great. It represented the pilots. It represented the way we conceived that the air war in the North was being fought by very professional people, and it was as good as if we had done it ourselves.
Well, now, I'm duty-bound to ask. I've got to ask you, of course, which network it was. Will you tell me?
Yes, I will.
Which one was it?
It was CBS.
Well, taking that incident that you had with CBS and applying it, Mr. Talbot, to your 12 years as a public information officer, what effect do you think incidents like that have on a democratic society which is supposed to enjoy a free press?
Well, I feel that the military information arm is so vast, has been able to become so pervasive by the variety and the amounts and the way and the sheer numbers it's able to present its viewpoint to the American people. I think that this attitude that it was able to develop allowed Vietnam to happen. Had we not been able to convince the American people prior to Vietnam that a military solution was a correct solution, without a doubt, and not to be questioned, that we couldn't have had a Vietnam, I feel that if we allow this pervasiveness to continue, that, frankly, it could lead us to another Vietnam.
We have reported tonight only a fraction of the total public relations apparatus belonging to the Pentagon and supported by taxpayers. Indeed, the news restrictions on the current invasion of Laos raise the question whether the public's right to know is being served or thwarted. On this broadcast, we have seen violence made glamorous, expensive weapons advertised as if they were automobiles, biased opinions presented as straight facts. Defending the country not just with arms, but also with ideology, Pentagon propaganda insists on America's role as the cop on every beat in the world. Not only the public, but the press as well has been beguiled, including at times ourselves at CBS News. This propaganda barrage is the creation of a runaway bureaucracy that frustrates attempts to control it. Last November 6th, President Nixon sent this memorandum to executive agencies, criticizing what he called self-serving and wasteful public relations efforts. He directed an end to what he described as inappropriate promotional activities. The President specifically ordered, in his words, a curtailment of broadcasting, advertising, exhibits, and films. Just since the memo was written, the Army's Golden Knights, a parachute team, have performed for the public in Nevada, California, North Carolina. Other Army exhibits have traveled to 59 different locations. Air Force displays like this Hound Dog Quail missile have appeared in at least 36 shopping malls and municipal centers since the memo was written. We went back to the Pentagon and asked what effect the presidential directive would have. We were told there will be cuts in personnel, not activities. There may be some disagreement, of course, over just what constitutes an inappropriate promotional activity, but to date, not a single activity shown on this broadcast has been eliminated. Tomorrow morning, according to Defense Department schedules, there will be an Army show pushing the ABM in Mountain View, California. An Air Force missile will turn up in Houston on Friday. The Pentagon's traveling colonels will be in Hampton, Virginia, March 8th. And next week, 5th graders at the Hill Elementary School in Davison, Michigan, will get to see the Navy's propaganda film on Vietnam. This is Roger Mudd for CBS Reports.